So welcome to another episode of the Late Late Aesthetic Show. So today we're joined by Dr. Mayoni, who is the founder of Human Health, and we're really going to delve deep into functional medicine and aesthetic medicine, but also health, because I think health is a big thing that we just generalize. We don't go into in too much detail. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Mayoni. So a little bit about your journey. You started out as a surgeon.
Yeah.
And then you left the NHS, and now you are today specialising in functional and aesthetic medicine.
Yes, it's quite a turnaround, isn't it? Literally, I always wanted to be a doctor. My mum says she remembers me always walking around going, I want to be a doctor from about the age of 8 or 9. And then I went off, did all the things, ticked all the boxes, did my surgical training, became a colorectal and pelvic floor surgeon, and did a period of research in that time. And I think that's when I first started to realise we looked at the really unglamorous world of faecal incontinence. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started to realise that my clinics were full of women who were in their 70s and 80s, who'd just been massively underserved really by the NHS at the time and by the healthcare system at large. And we didn't have sort of solutions, and they were being told now that they were just too old and it was too late and they weren't going to have surgery. So that was my first sort of really understanding what women went through, even though I was a woman myself. And then I completed my surgical training. I left the NHS because I just knew there had to be a better way to do stuff. Yeah. I really did set up my aesthetics practice. Then I realised that really women were coming to me, and there were women like me who were a bit tired, a bit knackered, and just wanted to look and feel better. And they also started asking me questions about their general health. And I knew I could help them because they were really, not in a patronising way, but they were really kind of straightforward things that I could really help them with. And skin fit, mind fit and body fit were all men. And then that evolved. And then COVID happened. And again, I was like, we must be able to do more here. We all know really what's causing this disease process to affect some people in a really bad way, and it's inflammation, and it's that inflammatory process that was happening throughout their body, and Human Health was born from that, really, from my desire to try and help on a much bigger global level to raise awareness and educate people. So yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I'm really looking forward to delving deep into what we can do to improve our health and age, as healthily as we possibly can. So let's get straight into it. So smoking and vaping. They are still a very, very hot topic. Vaping, I think now more so than smoking. What are your general views on this? How does it impact the skin? And do you think that it's a healthy thing that we should be continuing to do?
So it is a hot topic, isn't it? And I think particularly in light of certain, recent, things that have happened in the celebrity press as well. I think fundamentally we know that inhaling something that is not air is going to have an impact which will be detrimental to our health. Okay, I think the positioning of vaping has been really interesting from a health behaviour change point of view, which is it's being positioned as better than smoking. I guess, it's controversial. It depends on if you're coming at it from a sort of psychological viewpoint or from a health point of view. I think fundamentally, if you can avoid smoking and vaping, that has to be a good thing. Smoking contains lots of toxic smoke as well as the nicotine. Vaping is in theory positioned as being better for you because of the fact it doesn't have smoke in. However, a recent Johns Hopkins study showed it has something like 2,000 unknown chemicals in it still. So what are they doing? They don't even know what that's...
Too soon to know what the research is going to show.
Yes.
And so I think in 10 years' time, we'll have more information. We'll be having a much more different conversation about it.
Yeah, and I think the other concern I have around vaping is, whereas smoking has now got very strict kind of advertising rules around it, there's a local vaping shop down the road from me, which looks like a children's sweet store. You know, it's lit up. It's got the packaging is beautiful and really kind of pretty and looks like fruit, and it's gamifying a lot of it as well. The names of the products sound like fruits or something healthy.
To be healthy,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, or bubble gum, you know.
Yeah.
And I think the marketing is quite clearly aimed at a very younger demographic. So I think there is still a lot of work to do. So I don't think we can rest back and go, oh yeah, vaping's fine. I think, like I say, ideally we shouldn't be inhaling anything real. It's not air.
It's a great takeaway. If anyone wants to take away anything from today, it's that's key, definitely.
Keep it simple.
Definitely. I think healthy aging is, it's my biggest goal, and I think it's a goal of a lot of our listeners. So what are the key pillars of aging gracefully, in your opinion?
So that's really interesting because it's something that I've put together as a human health concept. So these are the pillars of health. And to my mind, that is really good nutritional choices. Most of the time, I think, you know, we're living in the real world, but making good, sensible choices around the kinds of food we're eating, where they're sourced from, how it's got to us, and the way we eat that, I think are really helpful tools for people to look at. Potentially supplementing after testing. So I'm very much of the test, don't guess sort of way of thinking. I would say also joyful movement is another really important pillar. So this is something where you're moving, you're exercising, really moving your body in a way that brings you joy. It's something that makes you want to get up in the morning and do it. For me, that's actually lake swimming, it's walking my dog. You know, it doesn't have to be a big kind of 5K run. For some people it is, but it doesn't have to be
enjoyable.
No, and I think it also should be something that's not punitive, so you can't make up for bad behaviour, as it were. You know, if you've decided to have a takeaway and have a bottle of wine every night for the last week, you can't really start to jump on the treadmill and hope it negates that. I would applaud you doing it, but I think know why you're going into it. You can't just write that off. Looking at really good sleep patterns, and looking at how you manage stress is helpful. Relationship thoughts are really important. Probably the most important relationship is the one that we have with ourselves, and how do we position ourselves in our health journey is important. And finally, toxic substances. How do we mitigate those as much as possible? And that's quite tricky living in 2024 London.
Yeah, we live in a very, very toxic environment. Even drinking through plastic. I've read that can cause inflammation in the body.
Absolutely.
Inflammation is the root cause of all disease. So we should avoid doing that. We go outside. Even now, with skincare, for example, there are things that we can put on our skin now that are like anti-pollutants, which we didn't have then, let's say 10 years ago. So incorporating that into your skincare. I'm originally from up north, where the air is much fresher. The water is a different consistency as well. Whereas living in central London, you feel the difference, massively feel the difference.
Absolutely. I think with things like water, you can actually go online and Google search your postcode, and the local water authority have got a duty to actually give you the most up-to-date report, so you can search that freely. That's freely available. So there's lots that you can start to do. I don't want people to sort of go down a rabbit hole, because I think if you're not eating the most fantastic way, then worrying about your water is probably not the place to start. It can become really overwhelming when you start looking at toxicity. But yeah, absolutely. When you start to refine what you're doing, it's a good place.
Is there a certain pH that water should be? You know, when you buy bottled water and they all talk about the pH of the water, is there a certain pH that the water should actually be?
So that's, I would say, really controversial. Water is, by theory, neutral. That's exactly what it is, because there should be a balance between the hydrogen ions and the negatively charged ions, and that's the whole point. However, there will be regional variations depending on, like you say, where you come from.
Yeah.
And I would personally not worry so much about that. I would look at the actual impurities in the water. However, there are companies that are promoting hydrogen being added into your water. You can buy devices that pump hydrogen into your water. And there's some really interesting evidence that's coming out, really looking at the role of adding H+ ions to your water.
Okay.
And the way that affects your mitochondrial health. Yeah. So I think it's one of those watch this space type questions, yeah.
Intermittent fasting. So years ago, I'm talking back like cave times, we didn't have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It was never ever split like that. You would eat when the body's hungry. So I don't know whether I'm right in saying this, but I would tend to eat only when I'm hungry. So I don't tend to have set meals throughout the day. I eat healthily. I try to eat as much live food, live and organic food as possible. But I'll eat when my body's telling me you're hungry. What are your takes on how you should, let's say, plan your meals? And in terms of intermittent fasting, so I intermittent fast without even realizing that I'm doing that. What effect does that have on your cellular health? And do you think that that's a good thing to add into your routine?
Yeah, okay. So let's go back to what you sort of said about the beginning. I think absolutely intermittent fasting is very, very intuitive to us as creatures, as human beings as well. It's also been used for centuries in various religions as well, because it is thought to represent that kind of link to spirituality and godliness, and that role of light and mitochondria starts to play into that, into quantum biology as well, which is really fascinating too. I think for me, intermittent fasting now, there's a huge body of evidence. There's people like Voltaire Longo, who's a fascinating, incredible clinician who's written a lot about this. He talks about the 5-day fast. He kind of uses that as a minimum time point that you need to trigger a process where you are then entering a state of ketosis. And this is what ketosis to me is a bit like driving an electric car versus diesel, because it's really clean. It's clean energy. Ketones enter the brain. They cross the blood-brain barrier. They're a really useful fuel, and they burn in a really clean way, as opposed to something like glucose. Okay, so and we want to encourage this, and there's a lot of evidence for ketosis in treating actual certain conditions like epilepsy as well. And we also know that metabolic role of ketones is really helpful in looking at the terrain, the metabolic terrain for certain metabolic conditions. And that includes things like diabetes, cancers, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, strokes, and Alzheimer's. Okay, so a huge body, a cluster of metabolic conditions. So intermittent fasting absolutely, I think, has a really powerful role in health. My worry is always where things are kind of done on a whim, or because an influencer said it and they're promoting a brand. I would really advocate doing it very intentionally with a clinician if you're going to engage with a period of fasting. And remember, as women, we also need to fast in a slightly different way to men. Okay. We are likely to generate quite a few toxins. Okay, so we actually need to be able to break those products down. So we need to make sure that we are detoxifying our breakdown products before we enter a full-on metabolic process of ketosis. So again, work with a clinician who can help you navigate this. Okay. I think the other thing just to kind of mention is with intermittent fasting, it's got this sort of, what you're describing is wonderful. I think the more we can integrate it into a way of life, I think it's useful. I think my only kind of questions would be, make sure you're having enough calories, make sure you're balancing your plates out, so you're having enough protein in your meal plan.
Protein.
Yeah.
But I think I naturally crave more carbs than, let's say, like my partner would. Like, I crave more.
Yes.
But that's what I think, because I'm a female, so my hormones are obviously different, different time of the month as well. Your body craves different types of foods as well. Yeah. But protein, I think, for women shouldn't go underestimated whatsoever.
And so your craving for carbohydrates would make me want to look at what your calorific content is for the day. And I think making sure you've got some snacks to hand is really important, which are like protein. Yeah. And I think, so the going back to the sort of science of fasting, that I think there's two parts to this. There's the time element. So you're actually narrowing your window of eating. And what that does is it allows your body the time to clean up. So that's autophagy. That's the word for it, which literally means sort of self-eating. This is basically where your body is allowed to clean up between processes. The process of actually breaking down food is actually very messy and creates a lot of byproducts. So that needs to be cleaned up.
Right.
And so we need clean up time. It's like having a party and making sure we clean down between each party. Otherwise, it's the house is a complete tip. You can't just keep eating. So that concept of constantly snacking is important.
The body, and this is going back to the cave times, your body isn't used to eating that frequently. So this is why I'm not a big snacker, is because my body, I don't necessarily feel that I need to. But sometimes if, let's say, I'll go a whole day and I'm busy, for example, I will forget to eat. And then all of a sudden I'll start getting really headachy. I'll feel tired. That's because your body hasn't got the nutrients that it needs to have to fuel it at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so for someone like you, I would say maybe it may be you're not a breakfast person, and let's face it, breakfast isn't a naturally innate thing for all of us. It could be that you just have something like a really high protein smoothie mid-morning, so you can have it, to hand. It's easy. Absolutely. You can build that up and you can make some really beautiful smoothies, and then have something more intentional at lunchtime. And that concept of eating like a king at lunchtime and a pauper at dinner is actually built on that. So you giving your body the chance to break down and clean up at lunchtime, and then have something lighter towards the end of the day. Try and leave as long as possible between finishing your dinner and going to bed. Ideally about 3 hours, okay? Which again, for some people, it can feel challenging when they kind of go, I'm snacking right until bedtime. Well, maybe just start slowly. Don't, meet yourself where you're at. I think with a lot of behaviour change, you do want to sort of be realistic. So that's why a lot of, New Year's resolutions fall apart week 2, because we're setting the bar too high. So maybe just start to bring your mealtime back an hour from your bedtime.
Yeah.
Okay. Just see how that works and start to see how you feel and start to connect back to yourself. So there's the fasting window, which is really important. And then also how often you do that. So, how often in the week you might be doing that. And when you're eating, what are you eating? Are you eating loads of ultra processed food and pizza, which is not good. So look at the kinds of food you're deciding to eat in that potentially 8-hour window. It may be that you're then looking at less heavy food, you're actually eating more protein-based food.
And you find that when you eat the right type of food with the right nutrients in, and yes, the food that we eat now hasn't got the same level of nutrients in as it did 5 years ago, etc., etc. So that's when supplementation comes in, and as you mentioned, but supplementation based on what your individual body actually needs is so important. When you eat that nutritious food, you keep full for a lot longer because your body's reaping the benefits of what you're eating. Whereas if, for example, you went to McDonald's and had a McDonald's, that's all artificial. Your body's not used to eating that. So that's why you'll then never feel full, and you can continue to eat that for as long as possible, because you're not getting the nutrients from it whatsoever.
Absolutely. And it's
with the supplement testing, for example, I supplement, but that's based on my blood test results, and that's based on what I'm individually lacking. How would you recommend somebody, if they're, let's say, considering supplementation, what's the best starting point, and what type of tests should they be doing?
So for me, I would always encourage people to try and get their vitamins and minerals, trace nutrients, their essential fatty acids from their food. Okay, that's ideal. However, for some of us, there is a financial consideration. There's actually a kind of volume consideration. You may have to eat a huge amount of that particular food group in order to get what you need. And there's also a genetic contribution as well. Some of us are epigenetically not set up to absorb those things, particularly from our foods. For example, B vitamin is a really good example. Vitamin D is another really good example. Some of us lack the enzyme that allows that process to happen easily. And in those cases, we may need to take that as a supplement, which gives us a really high dose of it, or that we take it as a supplement that allows us to bypass a particular pathway that we're lacking the enzyme for. So that's very intentional supplementation. It's what I call deep nutrition. It's not just taking a handful of multivits or something that, like I said, influencers have talked about and been paid to talk about. It's actually really testing, intentional decision making, using those for a few months, ideally 3. That's what I would say is a minimum amount of time. And then repeat testing or checking in with your practitioner. How are you feeling? Like, has that made a difference to your brain fog, your energy levels, your sleep? the problem with a lot of the symptoms we're trying to treat, they can be quite vague. And so being really intentional with how you're treating them is helpful.
And how would somebody get access to these types of tests? Is this something that's available on the NHS, or is this something that we'd have to go down and, let's say, visit you in your private clinic?
So I'd say both. There are things that are available. Vitamin D is something that's tested for and available. And because there is actually an epidemic of low levels of vitamin D in the UK. This is related to sun exposure, it's related to our lifestyle, and so there's been an increase in the amount of rickets, osteomalacia that's been reported. So yes, there are specific things that you can be tested for. B12 and folate is another one. However, the more trace elements or the more trace vitamins and minerals that require specific supplementation are not available. So you would need, you'd need private testing. And I have noticed that some of them are available across the counter now. There's some testing that's available in some of the pharmacies,
Oh, that's beneficial, definitely. I had to go to Dubai to do my testing. Really? Yeah, did my it was only because I was out there and I thought I might as well just do everything and while I was there. You've been in the aesthetic space for quite some time now.
Yeah.
I think 2025 is a really exciting year for our industry because I think last year we started stopping looking at just what's happening externally and we started thinking what's happening internally. So where do you see the industry growing and moving this year? And I know you've got some really exciting initiatives that are coming up in 2025. And how exciting is it for you to be in the aesthetic industry in 2025?
Well, really exciting. It is 10 years. It'll be 10 years in February that I first set up and did my aesthetics practice. So I am delighted because I've been talking about the whole person approach for 10 years. And that for me is definitely leading the way in aesthetics, which is really exciting. I think aesthetic clinics are really well placed to help patients holistically. I think for me, the regenerative aesthetic space is definitely exploding, and rightly so. I think for me also helping people to understand and educate them around optimizing their cell health. It's all very well spending thousands and thousands of pounds on these wonderful kind of skin related treatments and having injectables done. But if your cell is not able to respond in a way that we want it to that peel or that microneedling treatment, you're going to have a suboptimal result. So it makes total sense to make sure your cells are firing on all cylinders before you have that treatment done.
And you will achieve a much better result as well. Much better result. And I've seen people over the years that just come into clinic and they just have injectables and they forget about their skin and they don't understand why the injectable hasn't given them that glow or given them that real change that they were actually looking for in the beginning. So yeah, that is it's so crucial, really crucial.
Yeah.
Social media, it plays a massive part in in any industry, but I think more so in our industry because our industry is typically very image driven. We get patients that come and see us, they look on social media, they would like to look a certain way. You mentioned there's influencers that will advertise something because they're getting paid to advertise that. How do you differentiate with a patient between what's a fad and what is actually going to deliver results? How do you manage that situation?
Do you know what, Vanessa? I just don't take any notice of what's going out on the social media. I think for me, I stay really focused on the science and education and what I believe to be the most important thing. And I think for me, creating a very personalised approach to that person, we could see two patients in clinic with exactly the same issues. It might be acne and, they may have some frown lines that want treated. However, the way we put that plan together for that person will be totally different to that second lady who comes in. It sounds awful, but I just don't pay attention to the social media, but I know it exists. I know it's out there. I've got 3 teenage children, so it's definitely out there, but it's, I think it's helping people to stay focused on the science. Ultimately, social media is also, something I use social media to promote what I do. So there's a massive plus to it. I think putting out our message intentionally and meaningfully and backing it up with data and science and staying rooted in that, I think, is really what my patients come to me for.
Absolutely. I think I've noticed over the last 12 months or so on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Ozempic has got a really, really big search. It's very trending. You're probably reading the papers every day. Ozempic is a headline. This person's taking Ozempic, etc., etc. The whole concept of Ozempic was to reduce weight in obese patients. That was the whole concept behind it. What are your views and what's your take on Ozempic and the long-term benefits or risks that it may have?
Well, I think there is a place for everything. I'm a doctor first. I'm not here to kind of have an opinion on something. I think really for me, it's to make sure that the best thing is being offered to my patients. And actually, interestingly, literally on the 20th of January, Nature published a brilliant article. They looked at over 100,000 users of GLP-1 agonists, which is what Ozempic is, and looked at the risks and the side effects. And it's a brilliant paper, so it's really interesting. And essentially, it's actually relatively safe. It's, and that's on this short-term data. We don't have the long-term data yet, and I think we've got to be mindful of that. So I always worry about a medication becoming a fad. That's sort of...
It's still a medication.
It's still a medication, yeah. It has to be really, I would encourage anyone who's thinking about it, have a conversation with a clinician who should be able to talk to you about it in a meaningful way that puts it in the context of your life. I think be cautious of anything that's just being handed out online. Without the support network, we've created BodyFit and BodyFit Plus for this reason, because it encourages you to really hone down on those pillars that I talked about at the beginning, make sure they are in place so that the GLP-1 agonist has actually got a really good place to help support you. I think the other thing about GLP-1s is that what patients report to me is they go, I just go to the fridge and I just don't want anything from there. And I'm like, okay, well, so what do you do? What do you do then? And that is the key. I think GLP-1s give people the thinking time to make a better choice. So actually, they close the fridge door and they might go and read. Now, that's incredible. So I can't ever take away from something that's going to give people a better choice. So making sure that you start to put in place. It might be you need to go and do something with your hands. People take up knitting. They do other things. And I think it makes you question why you want to put something in your mouth. And for a lot of us, food has got a big emotional component to it, and a social connotation to eating. It's not just nutrition. So use the GLP-1 thinking time, as I call it, to help you make better choices. And do it meaningfully. Have the intention to come off it at some point. It's not forever, ever. And work with your clinician to really come to a decision.
Yeah, there's talk about microdosing now with GLP-1s, such as Ozempic. What are your thoughts on microdosing to sort of like wean you off it so you don't just, for example, stop taking it altogether and then, you gradually come off it?
So I would have to sort of say, on the record, there is no evidence about the microdosing. So I would, if you're working with a clinician, you should really be sticking to using it as per the guidance, is where I'd probably sit on that. I think the other thing, just to go back to, I think you mentioned about using it for weight loss. I think what I have also started to notice is that GLP-1s are being prescribed by aesthetic practitioners for the cosmetic benefit. And we've got to be really careful of this, because I think this is where we start to get into sort of deep water. When there are studies that have been published that show its safety profile for patients who've got a certain BMI. Agree, BMI is not the best way to, but it's the only tool we've got in this setting, of a certain BMI with medical conditions. That's fine. You go to a CQC registered clinic and you get your GLP-1 and you have it monitored. There are a group of clinics where it falls through the gap, where prescribers are prescribing it for people who don't fall into that medical category. It bypasses the CQC regulations, and it means that then it's being used off license.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the bit that you know, I get the importance of cosmetically helping someone because it helps their psychological outlook, but how are they being supported? That's my real question. So again, it goes back to just choosing who's your prescriber, who's looking after you, making sure you're on a meaningful journey with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that throughout your practice you were seeing a lot of women, and you do specialize in women's health.
Yeah.
I mentioned that I would, let's say, maybe crave certain types of food, and that could be down to my hormones, etc., etc. Women have a lot of hormones. That's the reality.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of women with hormonal imbalances, and does that affect their overall cellular aging and general aging, and how do you monitor and manage that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we are incredible because we've got hormones. As women, you know, it's something to be celebrated. But I think it goes back to what we said right at the beginning, probably offline, which was education is key and it needs to start at a really young age. I think as women, as young girls, we're kind of scared about our periods. It's like, oh, this thing that's going to start, and it's, oh my God, it's going to be awful. And then, but what are periods about? You know, they're the thing to be avoided, and you don't want to get pregnant. And do you know what I mean? We are brought up with a real scarcity mindset.
True.
And that feeds right through to our 20s, 30s, 40s. And even when we hit the perimenopause and the menopause, it's like, oh, this, oh my God, we've got no hormones. It's going to be awful. And you're going to be this sort of shriveled up old thing. You know, I'm a year off being 50. I've no intention of aging the way that my mum did, with as much as I love her and I respect her. But we are a generation who are ready for the next challenge. We were also brought up with the belief that we could achieve anything.
Yes.
And suddenly we've got to this point in our 40s and 50s where we're like, what do you mean we've got brain fog? What do you mean we've got, you know, this issue with our weight loss resistance? Why is it that we can't eat anything whenever we want? We can't sleep and we're anxious. So because it has an impact on us achieving and thriving and smashing those glass ceilings. So for me, I'm very much about helping women to identify and work with the human health pillars, balancing out those hormones as they need to, with or without the help of actual hormone support, so that they can walk into the boardroom and not forget their boss's name, so that they can go into a pitch and nail it, so that they can smash.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we can do anything. That's, I totally believe.
Exactly. HRT is readily available on the NHS. BHRT, which is bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, is not yet available, I don't think, on the NHS because there's a bit of taboo around it. Mm-hmm. Do you offer it in your own practice? And do you see that it is beneficial for women that, let's say, have got hormone imbalances that want to level the playing field?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be clear, you've got bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and body identical. So body identical is available on the NHS. These are hormones that are virtually identical to our own. And they are made, they are regulated, they are prescribable, and that's something I prescribe. Bioidentical are, again, these body identical hormones, but they are at titrated doses to you. So this becomes a very bespoke prescription. So if you came to see me, and this is also something that I do, it is unlicensed, which always sounds a bit scary, but it doesn't mean it's dangerous as such. It is something that needs to be monitored. It is something that's a reflection of your unique hormone profile. And that's something that I would do on the back of making sure all those other pillars have been balanced, that we've done some epigenetic testing on you to make sure that you can detoxify the hormones. I'm certainly not of the school of thought of just supra threshold doses of hormones. I think that's, something to be careful of. But for me, it's about balancing. So it might be just adding something like progesterone or a low dose of testosterone to bring your hormones back into balance, depending on your symptoms.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we often hear about how gut health is linked to skin conditions. What role does the gut play in the overall body, and how important is it to have a very healthy, optimized gut?
Fantastic question. I think so. Our gut is obviously important for absorbing our food, but what we forget about maybe, and what we're learning more and more about, is the role of something called the gut microbiome, which is a protective layer It's a layer of organisms which actually weirdly outnumber us in total in terms of the number of body cells that we contain. We've got more microbiome cells than we do our own cells. So it's really important. And this is something that we've evolved with. We live in sort of symbiosis with our microbiome, and this informs so many of our intracellular processes. We've got our gut microbiome, we've also got it on our skin, in our mouth, our vagina, bladder, etc. So it's everywhere. And what this little ecosystem does is it acts as this communication barrier layer. It protects and reflects almost oncoming insults to our body. Okay. Now, things can go wrong with it, and usually through injury, stress, other infections, antibiotics, chemicals that we're exposed to. We change that dynamic. It's a bit like a garden. If you think about it like a kind of flower bed, that lovely kind of process and conversation between all the different plants changes, and in a good way and in a not so good way. Okay. And we can influence that. We can play to the strengths of that by supporting it, by making sure we've got the right prebiotics on board. That's the food for the microbiome. We can use probiotics, which are more of the microbiome. We can take these as supplements or in our foods to support and to crowd out maybe some of the weeds, some of the ones that aren't so good to have. And we can even take some of the postbiotics, which are the products that our microbiome makes. Things like butyrates, short-chain fatty acids. These are things that are produced by the microbiome and they cross into our bloodstream. Yeah. So it's pretty important. Yeah, definitely. And there are huge kind of conversations that happen between our microbiome and our gut, and our skin and our brain and all the various body organs. Okay. So there's this conversation that's happening, but also if that microbiome layer gets damaged, the gut layer itself is more likely to let things in. So it's more likely to let in other bacteria, other inflammatory markers, which then enter our bloodstream and circulate and cause, the way I think of it, are like little microfires around our body. Okay. And in our skin, it's obviously an organ we see. Yeah. So for a lot of patients, and I was amazed at how many more people came to me with things like rosacea, acne, post-COVID. Was that a direct COVID effect? Who knows? I think it was definitely a stress effect. And women were finding that this sort of constant stress exposure was causing an increase in their rosacea presentation and acne too.
So what's the best way to keep a healthy gut microbiome? What's a really good tip that someone could take away to make sure that gut microbiome is healthy?
I would say really, again, look at your pillars of human health, but from a direct kind of things that you can eat. Try and eat all the colours of the rainbow in terms of your fruit and vegetables. That range of chemicals, the colour range actually reflects the different phytochemicals, the chemicals that exist naturally in the skins. If you think of it as deeply coded, I love this sort of concept of it being deeply coded data. It's sunlight energy that's been transduced in the mitochondria in the skins of the fruit and vegetables, then made into certain chemicals, which is what gives the carrots the orangeness, your aubergines the purpleness, blueberries the dark blue blackness. That actually conveys a different chemical to your body, and that information is all brilliant coding information for your gut microbiome. So that's a really simple way to start, even though we kind of go, fruit and vegetables, they're really key.
Oh, fantastic. I would be looking at the colours of the rainbow.
Yeah, try and range it, try and mix it up and do something, try and get as many of those into your day as possible. Yeah.
What about the likes of like Yakult and Actimel? Because they're quite often in the supermarket that they'll help to improve your gut health. What are your takes on that? And is that something that, let's say, the general consumer, they should be doing there?
I'm all for increasing the probiotic content. And I think we've always got to be careful at, number one, the strain. So what sort of bacteria or microbiome is it that is being reported? And what is the concentration? Yeah. Okay. And what else is it coming in? Okay. So is it coming in something that's, fairly neutral? It's not going to irritate the gut. It's not laden with sugar, etc., etc. So I think looking quite carefully at what's in these products is critical for the consumer.
And I think that comes down to the customizable approach that we have when treating patients. It's not one size fits all whatsoever. You're a very, very big fan of testing to find out what that patient actually needs in order to create a bespoke plan. How far can we actually go with, let's say, testing to really customize a plan for a patient? How far can we go with that?
We can go really far, and we're only at the very tip of the iceberg. The kinds of technologies that are coming out are absolutely exploding. So, for example, a patient would, with me, have a very comprehensive set of bloods, and these are functional bloods. They're not just looking at, is this present or not present, or is it normal or abnormal? For me, is it optimal? So there's a range, and that will vary from person to person. I'd want to know about their epigenetics. So what is that particular SNP going to predispose you to or not to? And how is your gut microbiome functioning at the moment? What is it a reflection of? Yes, there is variation day to day from what you're eating, and the fact that, say, I'm in London today will affect my gut microbiome slightly. But deeply, there's actually a kind of deep thumbprint, a fingerprint that's left behind from our genetics and the way we were birthed and the way that we were fed as babies that's going to have an impact on our future microbiome. So there's a lot there, and I think, I'm not saying that we've got all the answers, but that's the exciting possibility. So we can be deeply personalised when we approach health. It's more than just a one size fits all.
You mentioned that your gut health is going to be slightly different because you're now in London. What would you say to listeners who are in London and they're looking at optimising their gut health? Is there a quick thing that they can do which is going to help that? Is it a supplement that you're supposed to take? Does it come down to your diet? What's the best key bit of advice?
Do you know what? While you're saying that, I was just thinking two things that I would always do is have a mindful practice. So really up-regulating my vagus nerve, which is that main nerve that runs from our brain all the way down to our gut. It supplies other things, but our gut primarily. So really up-regulating that. We can do that with some box breathing. You know, even getting here, I was like rushing. You're kind of like, oh, I'm going to be late. It's raining. And that drives that sympathetic response, which is going to pour loads of cortisol into our body, which is not great. So up-regulating my vagus nerve, and then I would really think about supporting my gut when I got home, or making sure I was eating something that was pretty nourishing, really to kind of mitigate that. Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to be really specific, I think antioxidant supplementation, if you are really busy in London, things like resveratrol, really powerful polyphenol that will be a sort of multi kind of functioning antioxidant.
I kind of lied to myself and said I get my resveratrol from red wine. So I'd get it for the fish, obviously in moderation. But yeah, that is something that I have been looking at adding in. Just being in London, it's just a different climate. It's a different environment for your body to be in, definitely.
Yeah. So those darker fruits for you, you know, your blueberries, blackberries are going to be really good. Dark chocolate's another good one. So dark chocolate, a little bit of dark chocolate, a little bit of red wine.
Dark chocolate's actually quite good for you as opposed to like milk chocolate, which is typically full of sugar. Yeah. Whereas dark chocolate's okay.
And an organic red wine as well.
Yeah. Of course. Doctor's orders, definitely. So let's do a quick truth or myth. So I'll give you a couple statements and you just say whether it's true or whether it's false. So does drinking more water, will that fix your skin problems?
Nothing fixes skin problems. I think it is a multi-pronged attack. So I'd say it's a big part of it, but not the only thing. Yeah.
But drinking water in general is good for the skin.
Everything,
yeah of course. Can you reverse aging with supplements alone?
No.
Okay. Vaping is safer for your skin than smoking?
No.
There's no
evidence. Don't know either. I'd say both are pretty poor choices.
You need expensive products on the skin to achieve results?
No, you need science-backed skin products on your skin.
Great. Hormonal acne can't be treated without medication?
No, that's not true. I think we can get quite far with the pillars of human health and really optimising.
I think you'll like this one. You can exercise out a bad diet. So just because you're exercising, you can eat whatever you would like.
No, you cannot outrun a bad diet, unfortunately. Sorry, guys. Your body keeps score. It remembers everything. It gets coded down. It gets deeply coded and retained. It's like a computer system. So it'll bring it out the next time you're in a really stressful situation. Go, do you remember all those takeaways you had last week? Yeah. So
well, I think as well, earlier you said something really interesting about exercise, and it's exercise that your body really likes to do, and that's what you should be doing. So I'm turning 30 this year, and I used to do weight. I mean, look, I didn't do weight training to the extent that I would like compete or anything. That's like not me. But I was going to a PT, and she was giving me really, really heavy weights to lift. And every time I was doing that, I was putting my back out. My lower back was it was getting painful. It wasn't that. So I switched it to doing smaller weights on more higher repetitions. My body seems to really like that. I always say your body's intelligent. So listen to your body and listen to what it wants you to do. It'll talk to you and go with that, definitely.
And with that, for you, looking at your epigenetics, it'd be really interesting to see what your twitch fibres are doing, your muscle fibres. So that's something else that you could then personalise your exercise routine even further.
Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely come and see you for that.
Yeah, sure.
So if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Your body knows what to do. Don't try too hard. And I think you're also just not the sum of your genetics. I think I was always told, well, you're always going to be like this. You're always going to look like this and you're always going to be like this. I think that's not uncommon to hear. But we can change that. We're only 20% of our genetics. The rest of it is totally within our control. So
self-dependent.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great. What's one wellness trend that you'd like to see disappear? We have a lot of fads that are happening.
I think I'm allowed to say this, IV drips, I think make me nervous because, again, I'm of the test and don't guess house. And I would also say the kind of longevity washing of everything. I'm very pro healthgevity and wellgevity. I think we need to be conscious when we talk about longevity. What is it? And I'm amongst some incredible colleagues who are very intentionally practicing longevity, but I think we've got to be careful of just longevity washing everything.
Yeah, and just throwing that term on absolutely everything. Yeah, exactly. What's the biggest skincare mistake that somebody makes in their 30s and 40s?
I would think probably over treating the skin, going on like really complicated skincare regimes without getting clinical help, getting a clinician to look at their skin.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you a couple of your expert tips. So what's one simple daily habit that can make somebody feel and look better?
Honestly, for me, it's having a morning routine.
Okay.
A morning routine of getting up, I meditate, have a cup of tea or something mindfully and plan your day and put into that. It may be your skin. It may be that you're actually going to intentionally look after your skin that morning for 5 or 10 minutes. And I think when people say they haven't got time for stuff, we haven't got time for things we don't make time for. You can make time for things if you intentionally set it out. And then after a while, it becomes very standard. It becomes part of your day.
Routine, yeah, exactly. So for anybody who is looking to, let's say, overhaul their health in 2025, where can they start?
I would say look at your daily routine, look at what's happening in your day and see if you can start to make those micro changes. Habit stacking is a really useful way of doing things. If you're going to start when you boil the kettle, maybe do 5 squats. Setting yourself realistic goals, the SMART goals, is a good way of making sure that this is something that's small, measurable, achievable, repeatable and testable. So you can actually kind of quantify it. Rather than saying I'm going to, climb Kilimanjaro next year. It's like, well, that's great, but how are you going to make that happen?
Yeah,
Let's work backwards and set those targets.
You're quite right. So where can our listeners connect with you if they'd like to find out more about your work, if they'd like to visit you in clinic? Where can they find you?
Well, they can follow me on Instagram. It's dr.mayoni. I've got a website. A lot of my clinic work is online, so you can always hook up with me. You can jump onto a clarity call and find out if we're a good fit and if it's something that we can do and work together with. And I'm also physically in clinic in South East London and in East London as well. So you can find me all sorts of places.
Thank you. So Dr. Mayoni, thank you so much for joining me today. Everything will be posted. So if anyone would like to comment or subscribe, please do that in the comments box. You've been a fantastic guest today. I'm definitely going to be eating more rainbow based vegetables. That's going to be my routine. And I'll send you a nice little picture of it. And it's on well late. You've been a great guest, and I'm sure our listeners have found that really, really insightful.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thanks for having me.